Thanks very much, Dr. Weiss. So to me, this is the fun part now that we're getting into how do we actually begin the study. So I'll warn you, I was raised a Southern Baptist, and this looks like a pulpit to me. And so if I feel the Spirit move me, then I'm going to appreciate any extra time, Dr. Weiss. So thank you, because this is the most difficult part now. Amen. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, brother. So now, as we begin to think about how do we get to where we, from the very start of identifying our patient population, thinking about how we're going to plan the study, all of the activities that go into refining our research question and thinking about how we put together our proposal and thinking about how we're going to collect data, what data are going to be important for us to collect. And we go through all of the preparations. Now we're actually to the implementation or the doing part of the study, where here is where the rubber meets the road. Now we're going to be determining, can we actually do this? Can we engage individuals to be willing to enroll in the study? Can we make sure that everything that we do follows all of the ethical principles that Dr. Wild talked about? So this is the very difficult part, and this is where you have to make sure that your research team is all together. And that when you get started in a research project, so much time, and our own team knows that, how much time we spend getting together to go through processes, make sure everybody understands the rules of the road, understanding how we can protect not only the patient that is going to be our participant, but also how do we protect the organization that is working with us as we have these studies. So we have a lot of responsibilities that extend beyond the actual participants that will be in that study. So it's a big responsibility. So, with great power comes great responsibility. So when we get moving, then everyone will have a great responsibility. So we're going to go through how we get our study started. How do we identify our patients? How do we enroll them? How do we begin to get to the data so that we will have the data at a point where we can begin then the analysis process? And what are some of the various procedural controls that need to be in place that I'm sure are in place, but many times we forget about them. We forget that they're there, and we fail to use some of the resources that are available for us to make sure that we are operationalizing then our research plan, not only effectively and efficiently, but safely. And then we'll talk a little bit about how do we manage the data? How do we ensure that our data are accurate, that our data collection process has been smooth and complete? Because at the end of the day, as we've mentioned, at some point, we're going to lock that database. And we need to make sure that everything is complete so that when we turn this over then to our biostatisticians, that they have the tools that they need to actually help us achieve those results. And then I'm going to spend a little bit of time on training, because this is crucial. And I think something that we oftentimes miss, that we think is going to happen magically while we're asleep, that everybody is going to understand what needs to be done. They're going to automatically know what their role is, and that problem solving is going to occur uniformly across our research teams. And this is something that, we talk a lot about, having things happen either by accident or by design. Trust me, with research, it's much easier if you have things happen by design, because then you are constantly evaluating and forecasting what you can expect. And then you have a plan then for very rapid remediation, because we all know that the unexpected, if you're working with people, the unexpected is going to happen. And so you need to be prepared for that. So let me start off by saying, what are some of the basic tools that are in place at the organizational level? And this should be there no matter where you are doing your research, wherever you are performing research activities, there should be a defined process that is in place. Dr. Wild talked about the IRB. That is a defined process that we know that anyone that is involved in any kind of evaluation of a human or their health information, that we consider this to be research, and that we need to make sure that whatever we're doing is going to be protective, not only for that individual, their physical safety, but also the safety of their health information. So we have to make sure that we have done an appropriate assessment, and we've identified the standard operating procedures or SOPs that are in place. Now, everybody has, in every facility that has a formal research program, you will have a research office and there will be SOPs in place. And those are designed to make sure that any patient that is involved in research as part of their care with that organization, that they are protected. And so there will be very specific SOPs that will outline the expectation on behalf of that organization to make sure that patients are safe. These are oftentimes written in a way to be step-by-step instructions. There are checklists. There are a variety of mechanisms in place to ensure that you have been given this information, you have had the opportunity to review it, that you are oftentimes attesting that you understand and that you will comply and stay in lockstep with what that organization requires. Some of us that, I was raised to be a free spirit, but I got to conform. I need to make sure that what I'm doing, that I'm doing in a way that protects that organization. So if you feel like you have not particularly been a detail person before, there are some things that you're really going to have to make sure that you are very detail oriented, and you're going to need to read these SOPs and make sure that you understand them. Again, they are there to help you be of that organization then are protected. And these SOPs should address every aspect of this enrollment and performance of the study process. Everything from how do you screen, under what circumstances, what are the methods that you use for screening, how do you enroll, how do you consent patients, what is involved in follow-up, and all of the data collection. Every step in that process should be addressed in your SOPs. So you need to make sure that you know them. So you will have then SOPs at that organizational level. There will be very specific processes that will outline, as an organization, these are the expectations that are in place in that organization when you consent a patient, that you will have very specific policies that will outline under what conditions consenting may occur, how you are expected to deal with a patient when you are inviting them to participate in a study. How do you explain a consent form? How do you deal with language differences and so forth? How do you deal with questions about an individual's ability to understand and truly provide informed consent? So please make sure that you take the time to review the SOPs at your organization, specifically regarding consent. We view that as the most sacred document in our research studies, and that, we have the approach that nothing can go wrong with a consent, because this is our agreement with the organization and with the participant in the study. And so it is our ethical and professional responsibilities that we take that very seriously. We also have to make sure that we are in touch with the compliance side of the operation. So individuals are at the organizational level to make sure that you are following all the rules. Dr. Weiss talked about what the expectations are, both that if you take money and accept money from the federal government, then there are regulations that you must follow, and there must be evidence in place that you have done things correctly. So working with the compliance department and individuals, I've never met somebody that worked in compliance that was not incredibly detail oriented. So they will help you make sure, and that's their job. You want somebody to help you do that. Now, can it be a painful experience? Yes. These are compliance meetings, require the anti-inflammatories before you go in, but that's their job, and they're there to make sure that everything runs well. You also need to make sure that you have relationships and understanding about the organizational financial responsibilities, all of the accounting that needs to occur, that you can't just indiscriminately decide that you're going to use money for moon pies to pay for your, everybody wants a moon pie for dessert. Well, that if that is not allowed, it's not allowed. And it really doesn't matter how you intend to explain it or couch it if it is not appropriate. And so you need then the people in compliance and organizational finance to help you then organize how you're going to approach your research. They're also very helpful because, costs that occur over time with your research activities need to be financed appropriately. So making sure that you have the ability then to access funds to do all of the work of your project at a timeline that is appropriate for your project. All that can be very important for you, especially as you work with your organizational finance department. So these step-by-step SOPs, these don't change regardless of the type of study that you are doing. So these should be consistent and then support consistency across anybody's studies, whether they're infectious diseases, oncology, orthopedics, it doesn't matter. Everybody should be managing this the same way. Now, you'll have SOPs then that are also at the study level. And these also are oftentimes not, these are not the type of documents that you revise, but they help you begin to move from the organizational approach to research to how are you going to actually perform this research within the walls or the areas of ownership or management of the organization. So this will begin to get more specific that, how will you enroll patients for this particular study? What are the constraints around enrollment? How will you consent this? This may be, your population may deal with pediatric patients. What is it that you need to deal with? Or it may be, a type of drug that you are going to require then some additional emphasis that these should be developed then at the organizational level, because again, there is that means of protection of the organization for these studies. There will also be rules regarding data collection. Now, all of us are experiencing the increasing constraints regarding data access. I know we've got, multiple passwords. I know many of us have, deal with firewalls, or you're saying, where's my email? It's in my, it went immediately to my mail quarantine or my junk or my spam. All of us are dealing with data security issues. This is the challenge that we are having both in research and in patient care. But your organization needs to make sure that regardless of your study, that your data are protected. So in some of our studies, we do data transfer. So we have to make sure that we are following the rules. We can't just, it's Friday afternoon, we're tired. Nothing's working. We told the sponsor the information would be that to them. We don't just say, shoot, I'm just going to go ahead and send it to my Gmail account, and then I'm going to send it to them from home. No, your organization will tell you exactly. It may be Friday afternoon. It may be inconvenient, but you still must follow those rules. And then any type of interventions that need to occur, either planned as part of your study, or if they're in response to something that occurred as part of the study, those are organizational SOPs. And again, these are designed to help your people, your team, carry out the study. They also, the SOPs, I tend to think an SOP is something that I don't modify. That's something that is organizationally established. What I do get to modify is, okay, how am I going to carry this out at the day-to-day operational level? How do I operationalize those SOPs? And we outline those things in our manual of operations. That's where we take our protocol that tells us exactly what we are going to be doing throughout our study. It defines all of our data elements. What are we going to be collected? And then we're looking at, on a day-to-day basis, how are we going to do the work? So it is imperative that you have an understanding of your existing organizational SOPs. So you make sure that the manual that you write conforms with what your organization requires. Now, sometimes you can be right in the middle of getting ready for a study, and then suddenly you realize that something that you have written does not conform with what you have either planned to do or perhaps what you have been doing. That's why you need to maintain the relationship and the constant communication with your research office, because, your research office is not there to play, gotcha. They're there to help you, to make sure that everything, everything works well. Now, you can have some really uncomfortable discussions with your research office. Sometimes you get put in a situation where you really don't want to do things in a certain way. And hopefully you find that area of negotiation with your research office, but ultimately, enter any of these conversations with an understanding of why people are doing what they're doing. There are people there to protect the organization. They're there to protect the patient. You want to do the same thing. You want to make sure that any patient that is involved in your study is protected. And so we have to find the way to do that and the way to make sure that our documentation is in place so that as we move forward, every person that participates in that study that is part of your team does things in the same way. So that, for example, you can't have a consent form that is going to be reviewed with the patient differently depending upon who the person is that is doing it. That there are points, now certainly the words that you use may be different, but the information that you provide, what you stress, how you ensure that the person that you are inviting to participate in that study, how do you assure them that that they understand and that it truly is informed consent instead of, just sign here and there's nothing much going on, nothing behind this paper, ma'am, look the other way and have them sign it. That's not what we do. So continuously review your manual of operations, continuously review that you remain in conformance with what your organizational documents are outlining for you. And if you do that, then you develop a good and a positive working relationship with the research office, and you allow not only them to do their best work, they allow you to do your best work. So now that we understand then what the rules are, let's talk about how we find our patients. And many times how we find our patients are going to be very specific to the research project that we have. Some methods are going to work for one a type of enrollment or attraction of patients, and sometimes other methods are going to work. But there are a lot of very traditional ways that we identify individuals to approach for our study. If you have something that is occurring on an outpatient side, you may have flyers that are distributed in practice offices or pharmacies or areas that you might have individuals that you can identify. These are places they frequent, and maybe someone will see that. I know in our hospitals, we'll have the televisions that are up that have kind of the looping type of information. You may have some studies then that are advertised that way. You may have word of mouth. You may have that, a provider, for example, will share information with others. I have a study going on. I'm looking to make this information in this study available to this group of people or these populations, and you can share that by word of mouth. You may have particular types of studies that require review of the medical record to identify. You can see that if someone is going to be doing a review of medical records, that you've got to make sure that you're following the rules of the research office so that you have permission to be doing that so that you don't overstep then professional and ethical boundaries. You might be looking at certain logs such as admission, emergency department visits, and so forth to identify as kind of a screening process to identify patients in that you would be able to approach. You can have a number of other methods for distribution. Some people will put newspaper articles or information in some coffee shop newsletters and so forth, but there are going to be a variety of ways for you to provide outreach. And so you can be very creative in how you outreach, as long as what you are doing is honest, and make sure that whatever information you are making available is following the internal rules of your organization. Most of the time, these types of advertisements and so forth will need to be reviewed and approved by the IRB and are part of your initial study documents and study approval. So your screening, though, begins at the very moment you begin to have your idea and you begin to think about who should I approach? How will I be able to reach them? And then all that is included then with the information you submit to the research office. But, don't wait until after everything has gone through the IRB before you begin to consider, how am I going to find these patients? This may be very difficult to do. So be thinking about that very early as you are developing your study. Now, I mentioned the importance of informed consent. This is your covenant, your promise, your agreement with your patient that they are going to receive this particular benefit or they are willing to accept this particular risk. So you're entering into that relationship with the patient. Therefore, it needs to be an ethical and an honest relationship. So you need to be explaining what you're asking of them, what inclusion in the study what it means to them, If it may mean something very simple, that we have a study where we're just going to collect a urine sample, nothing other than that, or we are collecting a respiratory sample or series of respiratory samples. Some informed consents will involve a particular intervention, such as administration of a drug or perhaps use of an implantable medical device, a full spectrum of activities. And so if you expect your research participant to say yes, they need to say yes based upon a clear understanding. So, always approach explaining your consent. Don't go at it that you're afraid you're going to give so much information they may say no. We don't want to have that approach. Now, we also know that sometimes we give information to patients, and just the information that we give them, that it may have very little to do with the actual performance of the study, but it may be something that really resonates with them positively or negatively. We've had an example where we had a study and we let the participant know that this is sponsored by a specific company. Well, if somebody doesn't like that company, then they may not want to participate because they don't like them. Not that the idea is not good, not that the outcome is not important, but does that mean that that you hide information? No. Part of that discussion is it is in that the consent form. We want to review that. We certainly leave the consent form for the individual to review. And then you have to decide and work with the IRB to say what points do I bring out and emphasize. And then how do I deal with bringing up and dealing with sensitive information like that, or sensitive to the patient? How then would you respond to what they say? So, the bottom line is the patient must understand, that participant must understand the study, what you're asking for them to do, what is involved in that. If follow-up visits are involved, then they need to know that. If there is compensation that is involved for that particular participation, then the amount of compensation needs to be appropriate, so it's not viewed as coercive. So we don't think somebody participated because we're going to give them an excessive amount of money. It's because they are willing to participate, and then they accept that as compensation for time spent and so forth, not as, being involved in research is not my part-time job. It's the benefit that is occurring, and then covering their expenses. So as you are reviewing the consent form, honesty, professional and personal ethics, being very intentional about the information that you are sharing with them, and then making sure that it's a two-way discussion. You provide the individual opportunity to discuss. Now you can tell, and I'm going to focus a little bit on training at the end, but I think it's important to bring up that in talking about consenting, clearly this is an area where you need to spend time with your research team so that they understand the consent form. They're equipped then to answer questions, that they are not only equipped to answer questions from the participants, but in infectious diseases, we have studies that cross all services. So we may have questions need to be able to talk in a very professional and knowledgeable manner with other providers as well as with patients. So making sure that everybody is able to do that. And as with all training, you need to make sure, I can tell you something to do, I can educate you, but we need to go beyond education. I need to also train you, and that is you can take that information and put it into action. And then I need to go one step further, and I need to make sure that you are competent to do that. So you can listen to me, you can apply what I'm saying, and then you can put that application into action that conforms then with all of the elements of that education and training that are part of that process. So we want to achieve competence among our research team. Now, to do that, it requires training and retraining and reassessment. It's a whole iterative process in and of itself. You can do training in a variety of ways. You can role play and demonstrate and, read back to me or respond back to me. You can set up scenarios. Simulation is an area that we've really been working on quite a bit, and I'll share that with you when we go into a bit more about training. But whatever you do for your team, everybody that has that role should be involved in that training. It's not only for certain people, new people, those that have not worked in a certain amount of time in clinical research. It should be uniform. Everybody is involved in training. All right. Now, when we talk about consenting, we talk about a variety of procedures. We need to be reviewing those procedures as part of our consenting and enrollment process. And this may include some very simple activities. It may be interviews or completion of surveys or questionnaires. It may involve something a little bit more intimate, the physical examination. It may require something that may cause the patient some level of discomfort. It may be that we're going to draw blood, or we're going to obtain then other tests, or that they are going to undergo other types of procedures. So whatever is involved in that study, you need to be able to share with the patient, be able to explain that to them completely, answer their questions so that they are aware. And as we've learned, as our population ages and we are enrolling more and more of the adult or the older adult population, not only do we need to be willing to explain to the patient themselves, but we also need to be open that their son or daughter may want to call you back to say, Mom or Dad is enrolled in your study. Can you tell me more? Because they were not able to share, they were not able to answer all of my questions. So we may be enrolling or explaining, to more than one person with any individual study. So, take that into consideration with your study budget when you are trying to figure out how much time this is going to require. Look at your study population as well. All right, data collection. We know that some studies require a lot of data collection. Some studies require manual data collection. Some are going to have a study that you will start that you may be given or provided a data collection form. Other studies you may have to develop the data collection form yourself. So all of that needs to be accounted for in terms of your time spent and allocation of resources, and then training as well. So if you're doing any data collection, then the individuals that are going to be responsible for data collection need to understand what that means. If I'm asking them to get height and weight, where do they find it? How are they going to document? Is it in inches, centimeters, pounds, kilograms? If you have dates that are documented, make sure that everybody is documenting that the same way. Is it day, month, year, or is it month, day, year? How are you going to get that information? That way you can make sure that your data elements that have been collected are done so consistently. This information is oftentimes outlined in a study manual, the SOP that you have for the organization. How are you going to find it? How do you deal with that information, and how do you collect it? But oftentimes your study manual itself will give you then the definitions of terms and then help you be very specific. You may have a very specific data dictionary. In fact, you should. I think Stephen talked about the REDCap and the importance of, consistency with our data and those data dictionaries. Your study material also tell you where to find the data. If we're looking to collect a patient's white blood count, well, when in the course of their hospitalization or the course of their clinic visits, which one of those CBCs do we collect? So very specific about not only the test, but the timing of that test. And as you can tell, getting started in these processes, the implementation of your study is not going to go smoothly right off the bat. There is a lot of effort that goes into making sure that you are pilot testing or checking, let's do some portion of this and then see what our problems were, so we can figure out where there are systems related issues, where they personnel related issues, and then you can develop a plan to correct them. So, when you are out of the starting gate for a study, everybody's all excited and you're ready to get going, but don't feel like that you're doing a blast off from NASA. That we can start slowly, make sure that we're not having problems, we can correct those problems and then move forward. When we do data entry, many times you will have an ability to do some direct data entry through a transfer. So we may be able to develop some type of programming that you can pull specific data elements right out of Epic and pull it into perhaps a REDCap. Many times, however, you have to collect data by hand. Then you will have to look at what you wrote, make sure that it's legible, because that is your source document. So you don't start whiting out on your source document. You protect those materials, because you're going to have to file them and make them available in case someone wants to review those, like a study monitor. But your information then needs to be documented so that you can then manually enter in many situations into another database. So you can see there's opportunity for error, right? I could accidentally hit the, type it incorrectly. So taking time with your data entry, setting up whatever controls you can so that you can, we all know that human factors engineering is important. How do we prevent the ability to perform a specific error? However, we can develop our databases and control for that can be very important. If you can do, again, data transfers, that's wonderful, but everything requires quality. So quality errors or errors in research can occur at a variety of places along the process. You can have errors in the way or how or what data elements are collected. You can also have errors in how data are entered, whether it's onto your paper data collection form or movement from paper into an electronic form. Or even if we're doing a transfer, we always double check. We have to have quality in those electronic processes as well. So I think that the take home message of all this is that every step along the way of your research activity must have a attention to quality, that you need to be looking to make sure, are we enrolling? Are we screening? Are we enrolling? Are we discussing with patients? Are we performing procedures, tests, and so forth? Are we collecting data? Are we doing the data entry or data transfer? Every one of those steps requires an attention to detail. It's ideal the closer that we get to being able to have large medical record systems that are where data are pulled and perhaps housed in a data warehouse that protects it or keeps it separate from the actual here and now or present data collection or data entry that are occurring for that given patient. That allows us then to develop some safety measures so that we can evaluate those data. And then if we're able then to do electronic transfers, that we all hope this is kind of the future on where we're going, that will make not only data collection easier, but more efficient and less error prone. Because at the end of the day, our goal is to make sure that all of our data are correct by the time we're ready to close our study. So data quality is ongoing evaluation all the time. Training has to be focused on every aspect of the process, including where data are found, how we gather it, how we document, and then how we enter that, looking at how we evaluate every aspect of that data collection form so we can evaluate new areas that may be requiring training, are going to be an ongoing process. And then we have to know, how do we identify questions or queries, something that just didn't seem right or didn't fit correctly or was kind of thrown out or flagged as a question, that we need to use those queries as a means of identifying where our problem areas are so we can correct it and then decrease those queries or questions. So regardless of the type of study that you are doing, data quality reviews have to be done. And then at the end of the day, when we've done a good job, then we'll be able to lock that database and turn it over and then let the biostatisticians work their magic. And trust me, I love to have a happy biostatistician rather than a sad biostatistician. Wouldn't you agree, Thomas and Stephen? Yeah, I think they'd much rather be happy than sad. So, our goal is to make their life easy. So I want to end just with some photos and some brief discussion about training. And I think this becomes a lot of opportunity to really be innovative and impactful in your training. So I'm just going to show you some of the pictures and things that we are doing now with respect to training. And that every aspect of the study, we need to have a process so that we can validate that individuals are able to do what they need to do, not only so it's safe for the patient, but also safe for the healthcare workers. So, here we have a photo. We have one of our researchers reviewing the consent process. And part of this is not only how the consent process is reviewed, but since we're living in the time of COVID, what if personal protective equipment is necessary on the part of that researcher? Are they able to select, put on, take off the PPE that is appropriate for that particular patient? So we're able to evaluate, assess both of those. If a type of test is done or some type of intervention is done, then we need to make sure that they are able to do that correctly. So we don't want someone to describe how they would perform a test. We need to have the mechanisms so that they are able to demonstrate all aspects of that, and that we do that not only by having them be observed, but it's very helpful, you can see, to have photographs. So if there is something that is not quite right, that you can go back then and review with them. Now, not everybody wants to have a nasopharyngeal swab. I know I don't. I bet you're tired of it as well. So it's often helpful that, what is it that we can provide that enables us to allow then demonstration. So, having the types of models or simulation aids so that you can say, yes, when you need to do a nasopharyngeal swab, look how much of that swab is in the patient's where you can't see it. And so where should you position hands? And then we can also talk about the use of personal protective equipment. We can say, this is your patient is going to cough. How many of you want that on you, in your face, in your eyes, your nose? Well, if we provide those visuals, then we can make the experience a little bit more real. We can talk about aspects about labeling and how we handle specimen and how we handle documentation. We can also say, remember, you're a visitor when you go into a patient care area. So if you make a mess, clean it up. And how should you clean and disinfect an area where you have been? So going through then all of the expectations, and then how to remove personal protective equipment so the researcher then is also protected. And then, you can't work in healthcare now unless you're stressing hand hygiene. The use of alcohol-based hand rub, the use of soap and water hand wash, but that is an expectation that everybody is performing hand hygiene. And we're teaching, if you're taking off PPE, then you're cleaning your hands every time you take off an element of PPE. So you'll be doing that multiple times. And then we try to bring in visuals about, you think you don't need to wash hands after you remove gloves, but, let's use then some of the training elements that we can do that will show, if you don't wash hands, what contamination may be present. So we're able then to kind of bring home the message. Remember, we're teaching adults, and so we have to think about how adults learn as far as our teaching. Again, stressing hand hygiene, and then how do we manage specimen? How do we separate clean from dirty? How do we expect then researchers to deal with what they are collecting, whether it's a specimen or whether they are returning completed documents back into a backpack or a bag that they are going to then be transferring back to the office. So engaging your group in training, I think you can make it not only educational and fun, but also very impactful, because again, if you are going to perform a study, everybody needs to be practicing the same way, and that you need to make sure that your results are as good and as valid with researcher A as they are with researcher B. And that won't happen by accident. That has to happen by design. So we've talked about how do we approach then enrollment and all of the aspects of our SOPs and the various procedures, how we manage our data, and then training. So with that, then I'll also turn it back over then to my next colleague. As we've talked about statistics, then I think, Stephen, you're up.